The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the iron railings, cameras ready. Among them stood Margaret Whitmore, a 52-year-old woman from Surrey who had driven into London with her daughter Emma for what she called a proper tourist day. Margaret had always been particular about things. She liked her tea a certain way, her garden immaculate, and the world to bend just slightly in her favor. Her friends back home often joked that she could find fault in paradise itself. The Royal Guard stood motionless in their iconic red tunics and bearskin hats, rifles at their sides, faces frozen in disciplined neutrality. These soldiers were not props or actors. They were active military personnel, trained warriors who had sworn an oath to protect the crown. But to Margaret, they might as well have been wax figures at Madame Tussauds. Emma had been scrolling through her phone, trying to find the best angle for photos, when her mother suddenly grabbed her arm. Margaret had spotted something that offended her sense of order. One of the guards, a young man named Private James Thornton, had shifted his weight ever so slightly. To anyone else it was imperceptible. To Margaret it was an outrage. She marched forward, her sensible shoes clicking against the stone. Emma called after her, but Margaret was already beyond the barrier that separated spectators from the guards. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people raised their phones higher, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Private Thornton had been standing post for nearly 40 minutes. His legs ached, sweat trickled down his back beneath the heavy wool uniform, but his training kept him perfectly still. He had learned to let his mind wander to distant places while his body remained a statue. Today, he was thinking about his younger sister's graduation next month, wondering if he would get leave to attend. Then he heard the voice, sharp, insistent, cutting through the ambient noise of traffic and tourists. Excuse me, young man." Protocol dictated that he should not respond. The guards were instructed to ignore provocations, questions, and attempts at interaction. They were living symbols of British tradition and military discipline, but Margaret Whitmore was not easily ignored. She stepped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something floral and overpowering. Her face filled his field of vision, but he kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, looking through her rather than at her. "I'm speaking to you," she said, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You people think you're so special, standing here like mannequins. I have every right to be here. I pay taxes, you know. Your salary comes from people like me." Emma had caught up now, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Mum, please, let's just go. You're making a scene." But Margaret shook her off. She had worked herself into a state, the way she often did when she felt dismissed or disrespected. In her mind, this silent soldier was being deliberately rude. She had asked him a simple question about where the best photo spot was, and he had the audacity to ignore her. The crowd had grown larger now. Phones were recording. A security officer began moving toward them, but he was still 30 meters away, navigating through the press of bodies. Margaret's eyes fell on the sword attached to Private Thornton's belt. It was a ceremonial piece, polished to a mirror shine, the royal insignia etched into the blade. In that moment, something snapped in her reasoning. She would make him respond. She would force acknowledgement. Her hand shot out and grasped the hilt of the sword. The effect was instantaneous. Private Thornton's training kicked in like a switch being flipped. His hand clamped down on hers with iron strength, his other hand moving to secure his weapon. His voice, which moments ago had been silent, now rang out with parade ground authority. "Ma'am, step back from the guard. Do not touch military equipment." The crowd gasped. Emma screamed. Margaret found herself locked in place, the soldier's grip unyielding, his face suddenly very close to hers, no longer vacant but intensely focused. Two more guards broke from their positions and moved swiftly toward them. The security officer was running now. Margaret's face had gone from red with indignation to white with shock. She tried to pull her hand back, but couldn't. The sword remained in its scabbard, but her fingers were trapped beneath the guard's powerful hand. I didn't mean, let go of me," she stammered. Security officer approaching. "Ma'am, you are required to release the weapon immediately," Private Thornton said, his voice level but commanding. There was no anger in it, no emotion at all, just absolute authority. The security officer arrived, along with 2 armed police who had materialized from nearby posts. One of them addressed Margaret firmly. "Madam, you need to comply with the guard's instruction. Release the sword and step back." Reality crashed down on Margaret like a cold wave. She wasn't at a tourist attraction. She was at a working military installation, and she had just assaulted a soldier on duty. Her hand went slack. Private Thornton released her, his hand returning immediately to position on his rifle. He resumed his stance, eyes forward, as if the last 30 seconds had never happened. But they had happened, and now Margaret Whitmore was surrounded by security personnel and armed police, with at least 50 phones recording her every movement. Emma was crying, mortified beyond words. The crowd had fallen silent, watching as one of the officers took Margaret's arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that she understood this was not a request. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. You've committed an offense under military law by touching a guard's weapon." "But I didn't actually take it. I just touched it. I was only trying to get his attention," Margaret protested, her voice now small and trembling. "That doesn't matter," the officer said. "You'll need to be processed. Please come quietly." As she was led away toward a security office, Margaret caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the palace windows. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, her face blotchy, her dignity in tatters. Behind her, Private Thornton stood motionless once again, a statue of duty, as if she had never existed at all. The crowd began to disperse, already uploading their videos to social media. Emma stood alone for a moment, her mother's handbag still clutched in her shaking hands, wondering how a simple day out had turned into an absolute nightmare. She could already imagine the headlines, the comments, the viral mockery that would follow. Inside the security office, Margaret sat in a hard plastic chair, facing 2 unsmiling officers who were explaining to her exactly how serious her actions had been. The words assault on military personnel and breach of security floated past her in a fog. She kept thinking about her garden club meeting on Wednesday, about her book group on Thursday, about her standing in the community. All of it crumbling because she couldn't walk away from a silent soldier. One of the officers was speaking into a radio confirming details with someone on the other end. Margaret heard fragments. "Female suspect 50s, touched ceremonial sword. Guard responded appropriately, holding for formal questioning." She looked down at her hands, still trembling from the adrenaline and shock. The same hands that had reached out so thoughtlessly were now folded in her lap, suddenly feeling like they belonged to a stranger. How had it come to this? How had her need to be acknowledged, to be heard, to matter, led her to grab a soldier's weapon in front of hundreds of witnesses? The answer sat heavy in her chest, but she wasn't ready to face it yet. Not while the officers were preparing paperwork, not while Emma sat outside, probably mortified, not while somewhere out there, videos of her outburst were already spreading across the internet like wildfire. All she could think was, "I just wanted him to look at me. I just wanted him to see that I was there." But he had seen her. In the worst possible way, he had finally seen her, and now everyone else would too. The clock on the wall ticked forward, each second carrying her further from the person she thought she was, and closer to a reckoning she never imagined would come. The interrogation room was smaller than Margaret expected, painted in that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to drain the spirit. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the metal table where she sat. Across from her, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen reviewed a tablet, occasionally glancing up with an expression that gave nothing away. Emma had been allowed to stay in the waiting area, but not before Margaret saw the disappointment etched across her daughter's face. That look hurt more than the cold metal of the handcuffs they had briefly placed on her wrists during processing. Those had been removed now, but the impression remained, both physically and metaphorically. Detective Chen finally spoke, her voice professional and measured. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you understand why you're here?" Margaret's throat felt dry. "I touched a sword, I didn't steal it, I didn't hurt anyone, I just touched it." "You assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard while he was on active duty. You breached security protocols at a royal residence. You ignored barriers and warnings." Chen paused, letting each statement land. "This isn't about touching a tourist attraction, Mrs. Whitmore. This is about interfering with military operations." "Military operations," Margaret's voice cracked. "He was just standing there, they're always just standing there. It's a show for tourists." Chen's expression hardened slightly. "Those guards are active soldiers, Mrs. Whitmore. Many of them have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones. Private Thornton, the guard you assaulted, completed 2 tours in Helmand Province before being selected for ceremonial duties. The rifle he carries is loaded. The sword you grabbed is a real weapon. They're not actors. They're soldiers doing their job, which includes remaining vigilant against potential threats." The words landed like physical blows. Margaret had never considered that. In her mind, the guards were part of the scenery, like the palace itself. Living props in Britain's grand theater of tradition. The idea that they were real soldiers, that they had been to war, had seen combat, had lost friends, it had never occurred to her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Ignorance isn't an excuse," Chen replied. "But I'm more interested in why you did it. You had to cross a barrier. You had to ignore your daughter's pleas. You had to physically reach out and grab a weapon attached to a soldier's uniform. Walk me through your thinking." Margaret struggled to find words that didn't make her sound petty or foolish, but there weren't any. The truth was ugly. He wouldn't acknowledge me. I asked him a question and he just stared straight ahead like I wasn't there. It made me feel invisible, small. So I thought if I just touched the sword, he'd have to respond. He'd have to see me. Chen studied her for a long moment. "You needed validation so badly that you committed a criminal offense." When put that way, it sounded absurd. But wasn't that exactly what it was? Margaret thought back to the past year. Her husband Gerald had retired and immediately thrown himself into golf, barely speaking to her except to comment on dinner. Her son lived in Australia and rarely called. Her friends at the garden club had started meeting without her after she'd criticized one too many flower arrangements. Emma had her own life, her own career, her own problems. Margaret had been fatting, becoming background noise in her own existence. The guard's silence had been one dismissal too many. "I've been feeling invisible for a while," she admitted quietly. "Today something snapped." Chen's expression softened fractionally. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be straight with you. Your actions today could result in serious charges. Assault on military personnel, breach of security at a royal property, public disorder. You could be looking at a criminal record, possibly even jail time." The room seemed to tilt. Jail. Margaret Whitmore, who had never so much as received a parking ticket, facing jail time. Her mind raced to her mother, elderly and proper, living in Bath. What would she think? What would the neighbors say? Her entire identity, carefully constructed over 5 decades, was crumbling. "However," Chen continued, "Private Thornton has declined to press charges." Margaret's head snapped up. "What?" "The guard you assaulted has reviewed the footage and submitted a statement. He doesn't wish to pursue charges. He's recommended a formal warning and mandatory counseling instead." Chen leaned forward. "Do you know why?" Margaret shook her head, unable to speak. "Because in his statement he said, and I quote, 'The woman appeared to be experiencing emotional distress rather than malicious intent. She needs help, not punishment. I've seen enough real threats to know the difference.'" Chen paused. "That young man showed you more grace than you showed him." Tears burned Margaret's eyes, hot and shameful. This soldier, whom she had dismissed as a prop, whom she had grabbed and embarrassed, was showing her mercy. She had been so focused on her own feelings, her own need to be seen, that she hadn't seen him at all. Not as a person, not as a human being with his own story and struggles. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Now, you're going to accept a formal caution. It goes on your record but isn't a criminal conviction. You're going to attend 8 sessions with a counselor who specializes in behavioral issues. You're going to write a formal apology to Private Thornton and to the Ministry of Defense. And you're going to spend the next 6 months thinking very carefully about why you value being noticed more than showing basic respect to others." Chen slid a document across the table. "Sign here to accept these terms. If you refuse, we move forward with charges." Margaret signed without hesitation. Her hand shook so badly that her signature was barely legible, but it was done. Chen collected the paperwork and stood. "Mrs. Whitmore, I see cases like yours more often than you'd think. People feeling invisible, overlooked, diminished. They act out in increasingly desperate ways. But here's what I've learned. The more you demand to be seen, the less people want to look at you. Real presence, real connection comes from seeing others first." After Chen left, Margaret sat alone for a few minutes, trying to compose herself. When she finally emerged into the waiting area, Emma stood immediately, her face pale and drawn. "Mum, are you okay? What did they say?" Margaret couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. "I'm not being charged, the guard. He asked them not to press charges." Emma's relief was visible, but it was mixed with something else. Confusion, perhaps, or disappointment. "Why would he do that, after what you did?" "Because he has more compassion than I do, apparently." Margaret's voice broke. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry I embarrassed you. I'm sorry I've become someone who would do something so thoughtless and cruel." Emma was quiet for a moment, then she put her arm around her mother's shoulders. "Mum, you need help. This isn't the first time. You snapped at that waitress last month. You had that row with the postal worker. You've been getting worse." "I know," Margaret admitted. "I just feel like I'm disappearing, like I don't matter anymore." "You matter to me," Emma said softly, "but you can't force people to validate you. That's not how it works. And when you try, you just push everyone further away." They walked out of the security building into the late afternoon sun. The palace looked different now, less like a tourist attraction and more like what it actually was, a working building with real people doing real jobs. The guards had changed shifts, but Margaret found herself looking at them differently. Young men and women in uniform, standing in heat and cold, maintaining discipline and tradition, protecting something larger than themselves. She thought about Private Thornton, about his 2 tour in Afghanistan, about what he must have seen and endured. And she had grabbed his weapon because he wouldn't give her directions for a photograph. The shame was overwhelming. As they walked toward the car park, Emma asked, "What did the detective mean about counseling?" "I have to attend sessions, 8 of them, to work on," Margaret struggled with the words, "on why I need so much attention, on why I can't handle being ignored." Emma nodded slowly. "That's good, Mum. I think that's really good." They drove home in silence, but it wasn't the angry silence Margaret had feared. It was contemplative, heavy with unspoken realizations. When they pulled into Margaret's driveway, Emma turned off the engine but didn't move to leave. "Mum, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I've been avoiding spending time with you. The whole family has. Because you've become so critical, so demanding. You always need to be right, always need to be the center of attention. It's exhausting. We love you, but we've been pulling away because being around you feels like walking on eggshells." Each word was a small knife, but Margaret knew they were true. She had felt people pulling away and responded by grasping tighter, demanding more, until they fled entirely. It was a cycle she had never recognized until now. "I don't know how to change," she admitted. "Start by listening more than you talk. Start by thinking about what others need instead of what you need. Start by being okay with not always being the most important person in the room. Emma reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. You're my mum and I love you, but I don't like who you've become. Today was a wake-up call. Please, actually wake up. That night, lying in bed next to Gerald, who was already snoring softly, Margaret stared at the ceiling and replayed the day over and over. The moment her hand touched that sword felt like a line of demarcation in her life, before and after, the person she was and the person she might become. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Against her better judgment, she checked it. The first result was a video of her confrontation with the guard, already viewed over 2 million times. The comments were brutal, creative in their mockery, gleeful in their condemnation. She was seen now, all right, seen by millions. Karen grabs Royal Guard sword, the headlines read. The videos were everywhere. She had wanted to be noticed, and now she was notorious. Margaret turned off her phone and closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. All she could see was Private Thornton's face, the moment he had clamped down on her hand, his voice cutting through her entitlement with simple, devastating authority. Tomorrow, she would begin the work of becoming someone different, someone better, someone who didn't need to grab swords to feel real. But tonight, she would sit with the wreckage of who she had been, and mourn the person she had allowed herself to become. The video went viral in ways Margaret could never have imagined. By the next morning, it had been shared across every major social media platform, spawned countless memes, and been featured on news programs in 12 different countries. Her face, frozen in that moment of entitled outrage, became an instant symbol of everything wrong with modern behavior. Someone had identified her. Within 24 hours, her full name, her town, even her address had been posted online. The phone started ringing at 6 in the morning and didn't stop. Reporters camped outside her house. Her email inbox overflowed with messages ranging from support to death threats. The world had seen her, and it was not kind. Gerald had watched the news coverage in stunned silence over breakfast, his boiled egg going cold on the plate. Margaret, what were you thinking? He kept asking, as if repetition would somehow yield a satisfactory answer. But there was no satisfactory answer. How could she explain to her husband of 30 years that she had felt so diminished, so invisible, that she had reached out and grabbed a soldier's weapon just to force acknowledgement? How could she explain that his retirement, his withdrawal into golf and gardening, his comfortable silence, had left her feeling like furniture in her own home? The garden club chat group, which had been quiet for weeks, suddenly exploded with activity. Margaret watched the notifications pile up, knowing without looking that they were talking about her. When she finally opened the app, the messages confirmed her fears. Did you see Margaret on the news? Absolutely mortifying. I always said she was too confrontational. This is what happens when people think the world revolves around them. She deleted the app. Then she deleted Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the platforms where her face was being mocked and dissected. But deletion didn't erase the reality. The internet had a long memory, and she had given it ammunition that would last forever. The counselor's office was in a converted Victorian house in Richmond, painted a calm blue with white trim. Dr. Amara Singh was younger than Margaret expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes that seemed to see straight through carefully constructed defenses. The first session was scheduled for 3 days after the incident, and Margaret arrived 15 minutes early, sitting in her car and trying to gather courage. When she finally entered, Dr. Singh greeted her warmly, offering tea and gesturing to a comfortable chair near the window. Before we begin, Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to know that this is a safe space. Nothing you say here will be judged. My job isn't to criticize you, it's to help you understand yourself better. Margaret nodded, gripping her handbag tightly. Have you seen the videos? I have, Dr. Singh said simply, and I want you to set them aside for now. What happened after that moment has been taken out of your hands. What we can work on is what happened before and what happens next." Over the next hour, Margaret found herself talking about things she hadn't articulated to anyone, perhaps not even to herself. The loneliness that had crept in after her children grew up and moved away. The sense of purposelessness after retiring from her job as a school secretary. The way Gerald had retreated into his own hobbies, leaving her to fill the vast empty hours with activities that never quite satisfied. "I used to matter," she said, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "At work I was essential. The school couldn't function without me. Parents knew my name. Teachers depended on me. I had purpose. Now I'm just someone who fills time until it's time for bed." Dr. Singh listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Margaret finished, the counselor leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about the moment you decided to touch the sword. What were you feeling right before your hand moved?" Margaret closed her eyes, transporting herself back to that courtyard. Rage, not at him specifically, but at being invisible. He was looking right through me like I was air, and I thought, "I'll make you see me. I'll make you acknowledge that I exist." It was impulsive. I didn't think about consequences. I just needed to be real to someone, even for a second. And did it work? Did you feel real? For a moment, yes. When he grabbed my hand, when he spoke, when everyone turned to look, I felt substantial, solid, like I mattered. Margaret opened her eyes. But then it all crashed down, and I realized I had just proved everyone right. I am just a difficult, attention-seeking woman who makes scenes. Is that what you believe you are? The question hung in the air. Was it? Margaret thought about her life, the pattern of behaviors that had led to this moment. The complaints at restaurants, the arguments with shop assistants, the letters to the council about minor infractions, the constant need to correct, to criticize, to be heard. "I think I've become that," she admitted. "But I wasn't always. I used to be kind. I used to listen. Somewhere along the way I stopped." Dr. Singh set down her notebook. "Margaret, what you're describing is a very common response to loss. Not loss of a person necessarily, but loss of identity. When we retire, when our children leave, when our partners become more distant, we can feel like we're disappearing. And in response, some people get louder. They demand attention. They create conflict because conflict is at least engagement." "That's exactly it," Margaret breathed. "I'd rather people be angry with me than not see me at all." But here's what you're learning, and it's painful. Forced attention isn't connection. Being noticed isn't the same as being valued. And the more you demand validation from others, the less they want to give it. Dr. Singh paused. "The work we're going to do together is about finding value within yourself, not from external sources, about being comfortable with silence and stillness, about making genuine connections based on mutual respect rather than forced acknowledgement." The session ended with homework. Margaret was to spend 15 minutes each day in silence, sitting with her thoughts without distraction. She was to journal about moments when she felt the urge to demand attention and explore what was driving that need. And she was to reach out to one person each week with genuine interest in their life, asking questions and listening without relating everything back to herself. It sounded simple. It felt impossible. That evening, she sat down to write the required apology letter to Private Thornton. The blank page mocked her for 20 minutes before she finally began. "Dear Private Thornton, words seem inadequate to express my regret for what I did. I assaulted you while you were doing your job, protecting your country and upholding a tradition that means something to millions of people. I treated you like a prop, an inconvenience, when you are a person who has served and sacrificed in ways I cannot imagine. I grabbed your sword because I felt invisible and I wanted to force you to acknowledge me. This is shameful. My feelings of invisibility do not justify violating your safety, your dignity, or your duty. You stood there with discipline and honor, and I responded with entitlement and disrespect. I have learned that you served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I have learned that you chose not to press charges against me, showing me mercy I did not deserve and had not earned. This grace has broken something open in me. It has shown me the vast difference between demanding respect and earning it. I am deeply sorry. I am sorry for putting my hands on you. I am sorry for making your job harder. I am sorry for the attention this has brought to you. I am sorry for treating you as less than human. I am in counseling now, working to understand why I act the way I do. This doesn't excuse what I did, but I want you to know that your compassion has been the catalyst for real change. You didn't owe me anything, yet you gave me a second chance. I will try to become someone worthy of that gift. With profound regret and gratitude. Margaret Whitmore. She read it over 3 times, tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. It was honest, perhaps more honest than she had been with herself in years. She folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope, along with a donation to the military charity that supported veterans. The next morning she posted the letter before she could second-guess herself. Then she drove to Emma's flat in Clapham, unannounced. Her daughter answered the door in pajamas, coffee mug in hand, surprise evident on her face. "Mum, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you, really talk. Not about me, about you. I realized I don't actually know what's happening in your life. Your job, your friends, your hopes. I've been so wrapped up in my own feelings that I've stopped being your mother and started being a burden." Emma studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, I'll make more coffee." They sat at Emma's small kitchen table, surrounded by plants and art prints, and for the first time in years, Margaret asked questions and actually listened to the answers. She learned that Emma was struggling with a difficult manager at work, that she was considering a career change but felt trapped by financial obligations, that she had been dating someone for 3 months but hadn't told her mother because she feared criticism. "Why would you think I'd criticize?" Margaret asked, though she knew the answer. Emma gave her a sad smile. "Because you criticize everything, Mum. Nothing is ever quite right. You always have suggestions, corrections, better ways to do things. It's exhausting." The truth hurt, but Margaret forced herself to sit with it. "I'm sorry. I've made you feel like you can't share your life with me." "It's not just me. It's everyone. Dad barely talks at dinner because he's waiting for you to find fault with something. James stopped video calling from Australia because you always found something to comment on in the background. The garden club stopped inviting you because you'd criticize everyone's arrangements. You've isolated yourself, and then you got angry about being isolated." Margaret felt the weight of it settling over her shoulders, a lifetime of small cuts accumulating into separation. "I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to just be okay with things as they are." "Start small," Emma said, reaching across the table to take her mother's hand. "Start by biting your tongue when the criticism rises up. Start by finding one positive thing to say before anything negative. Start by asking yourself if your comment is helpful or if it's just you needing to be heard." They talked for 2 hours, and when Margaret finally left, she felt lighter than she had in months. The shame was still there. The viral videos were still circulating. Her face was still the internet's favorite punchline. But something had shifted. For the first time, she had sat with discomfort without trying to force it onto someone else. Over the next week, Margaret followed Dr. Singh's homework religiously. The 15 minutes of daily silence were torture at first, her mind racing to fill the void with worries and grievances. But gradually, she learned to sit with herself, to be enough, even in stillness. She journaled about the moments when the need for attention surged, waiting in line at the post office and feeling ignored by the clerk, seeing her friend Patricia at the shops and being greeted with brief politeness rather than enthusiasm, watching a mother and daughter laugh together in a cafe and feeling the sting of her own fractured relationships. Each time she examined the feeling rather than acting on it. What was she really afraid of? What void was she trying to fill? The answers were always the same: fear of being forgotten, terror of insignificance, dread of being just another face in the crowd. But she was learning that everyone felt this way sometimes. The difference was that most people didn't grab swords about it. On Sunday, she invited Gerald for a walk in Richmond Park, something they hadn't done in years. As they strolled past the deer grazing in the golden afternoon light, she asked him about his golf game, his friends, his thoughts on retirement. And then she did something revolutionary. She listened. Gerald talked about feeling useless without his job at the bank, about struggling to find purpose in leisure, about missing the daily challenges and interactions, about not knowing how to connect with Margaret anymore because she seemed perpetually dissatisfied. "I'm sorry," Margaret said quietly. "I've been so focused on my own feelings I never asked about yours." He squeezed her hand. "We've both been a bit lost, haven't we?" As they walked back to the car, Margaret noticed a young couple taking photos near the Isabella plantation. The woman was trying to get the perfect angle, her partner offering suggestions. The old Margaret would have interjected, would have shown them a better spot, would have inserted herself into their moment. Instead, she smiled and walked past, leaving them to their private joy. It was a small thing, but it felt like victory. 3 weeks after the incident, Margaret received an unexpected letter. The return address was from the Ministry of Defense, and her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a brief, formal note stating that Private James Thornton had requested permission to meet with her, if she was willing. A mediator would be present, and the meeting would take place at a neutral location. Margaret read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. Why would he want to meet her? She had written her apology, made her donation, accepted her punishment. What more could he possibly want? Or worse, what if he had changed his mind about pressing charges? She called Dr. Singh immediately. "I don't know if I can face him. What if he's angry? What if he wants to tell me what a terrible person I am?" Dr. Singh's voice was calm over the phone. "Or what if he wants closure? What if he wants understanding? Margaret, this could be an opportunity for real healing, not just for you, but for him too. What you did affected him as well. Maybe he needs to speak his truth to you." After a sleepless night, Margaret sent her acceptance through the contact provided. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at a community center in Westminster. She arrived 20 minutes early, her stomach in knots, wearing her most conservative dress as if formality could somehow offset her previous behavior. The mediator, a woman named Helen from a restorative justice program, greeted her warmly and explained the process. This was not a legal proceeding. It was an opportunity for dialogue, for both parties to express their feelings and seek understanding. Private Thornton would speak first, then Margaret would have her turn. There would be no interruptions, no arguments, just honest communication. When Private Thornton entered the room, Margaret was struck by how ordinary he looked without his uniform. He was younger than she had realized, perhaps 25, with sandy hair and tired eyes. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, and he looked as nervous as she felt. They sat across from each other at a small table. Helen sat to the side, present but unobtrusive. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then James cleared his throat. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Mrs. Whitmore. I know this must be uncomfortable." His voice was different than it had been that day, softer, without the parade ground authority. It was the voice of a young man, not a soldier. "I wanted to meet you because I've been struggling since that day. Not with anger, really, but with confusion. I've stood guard hundreds of times. I've had people try to make me laugh, yell at me, touch me. It's part of the job, but something about He paused, searching for words. "Your desperation, I guess, it got under my skin." Margaret felt heat rising to her cheeks, but forced herself to listen. "I went back to my barracks that day, and I couldn't stop thinking about the look on your face. You weren't drunk or on drugs. You weren't trying to be funny for social media. You were genuinely upset that I wouldn't acknowledge you, and I realized that I've felt that way before." This surprised Margaret. This confident soldier, this man who had served in war zones, knew about feeling invisible. James continued, his words coming faster now. When I came back from Afghanistan the first time, I struggled. Nobody wanted to hear about what I'd been through. My mates back home were talking about football and girls, and I was having nightmares about IEDs and firefights. I tried to talk to my dad about it, and he'd changed the subject. I felt like I was screaming and nobody could hear me. His hands, Margaret noticed, were trembling slightly. He clasped them together on the table. I went through a phase where I'd pick fights, arguments, anything to make people engage with me, to prove I was still here, still real. I was an absolute nightmare to be around. My girlfriend left me. My friends stopped inviting me out. And the more isolated I became, the louder I got. Margaret felt tears pricking her eyes. She saw herself in his story, the same desperate grasping for connection, the same counterproductive spiral. So when I saw you that day, when you grabbed my sword, I recognized something in you. That's why I didn't want to press charges. Not because what you did wasn't serious, but because I understood it. And I thought maybe if we could talk, we could both understand it better. Helen gestured to Margaret. It was her turn. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say, but now the prepared words felt hollow. Instead, she spoke from a deeper, rawer place. I'm 62 years old and I'm terrified that I don't matter, that I've become background noise in my own life. My husband barely speaks to me. My children avoid me. My friends have drifted away. And instead of asking myself why, instead of looking at my own behavior, I just got louder, more demanding, more critical. She looked directly at James for the first time. When you wouldn't look at me, it confirmed my worst fear, that I'm invisible, that I could disappear and nobody would notice. So I grabbed your sword to force you to see me, to prove I was real. It was selfish and stupid and wrong. But I did see you, James said quietly. I saw you the whole time, I just couldn't respond. That's the job. But I saw you, Mrs. Whitmore. I saw a woman in pain, acting out because she didn't know what else to do. The tears fell freely now. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for putting you in that position. I'm sorry for making your job harder. I'm sorry for thinking my feelings mattered more than your duty, your safety, your dignity. James nodded slowly. I accept your apology, and I want you to know something. What you did was wrong, but it doesn't define you. You're in counseling. You're trying to change. That takes courage. Helen spoke for the first time. James, is there anything you need from Margaret? Anything that would help you move forward? He thought for a moment. I need you to understand that everyone you meet, from shop assistants to bank tellers to guards at the palace, we're all carrying something. We all have struggles you can't see. When you demand acknowledgement, when you create conflict, you're adding to the weight we're already carrying. Kindness costs nothing. Patience costs nothing. But the absence of them can break someone who's already barely holding on. The words hit Margaret like a physical force. How many shop assistants had she snapped at? How many service workers had she berated? How many people had she treated as if they existed solely to serve her needs? She thought of the waitress last month who had gotten her order wrong. Margaret had made a scene, demanded to see the manager, left no tip. She had never considered that the waitress might have been having the worst day of her life, that her sharp words might have been the thing that broke her. I understand, Margaret said, her voice breaking. I've been cruel without even realizing I was being cruel. I've justified it as having standards or not accepting poor service, but really I was just making myself feel important by making others feel small. They talked for another hour, these two broken people who had collided in a moment of viral infamy. James spoke about his ongoing therapy for PTSD, about learning to ask for help, about finding purpose in his ceremonial duties by seeing them as protecting something larger than himself. Margaret spoke about her counseling sessions, about slowly rebuilding relationships with her family, about learning to sit with discomfort without inflicting it on others. When the meeting ended, they stood awkwardly for a moment. Then James extended his hand. Margaret shook it, feeling the strength in his grip, the same strength that had clamped down on her hand that day. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said. "The validation you need, but I hope you find it in yourself, not from strangers on the street." "I hope you find peace," Margaret replied. "Real peace, not just duty and discipline, but actual peace." They parted ways, and Margaret drove home in a daze. That evening, she sat in her garden as the sun set. The journal Dr. Singh had given her open on her lap. She wrote about the meeting, about James's words, about the realization that her pain did not excuse causing pain to others. The next day, she did something she had been avoiding. She went back to the cafe where she had snapped at the waitress. The young woman was there, wiping down tables, and Margaret approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said softly. The waitress turned, and Margaret saw recognition flicker across her face, followed by wariness. "I was here about a month ago, and I was incredibly rude to you. You got my order wrong, and I made a huge scene about it. I wanted to apologize. There was no excuse for how I treated you." The waitress stared at her, clearly suspicious. "Okay," she said carefully. "I also wanted to give you this." Margaret handed her an envelope containing £50 and a written apology. "You don't have to accept it. You don't have to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry and that you didn't deserve how I treated you." The waitress opened the envelope, read the note, and looked up with tears in her eyes. "I was having a really bad day that day. My mom had just been diagnosed with cancer. I was barely holding it together, and then you," she trailed off. Margaret felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "I'm so sorry. Is your mother okay?" "She's in treatment now. It's hard, but we're managing." The waitress clutched the envelope. "Thank you for this. You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," Margaret said. "I absolutely did." She left the cafe feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because she had made amends. Heavier because she was beginning to understand the full weight of her past behavior, the ripples of harm she had caused by treating people as if they existed solely to serve her needs. Over the next few weeks, Margaret sought out other people she had wronged. The postal worker she had berated over a late delivery. The council worker she had complained about regarding a missed bin collection. The shop assistant she had accused of being incompetent. Some accepted her apologies graciously. Others were cold, still nursing wounds from her words. She didn't blame them. At her next session, Dr. Singh asked her how it felt to make amends. "Painful," Margaret admitted. "Every apology is a reminder of who I've been, but also necessary. I can't move forward without acknowledging the damage I've caused." "This is the hardest part of the work," Dr. Singh said, "facing the truth of our impact on others. But it's also the most important part. You're not just changing your behavior, Margaret. You're changing who you are at a fundamental level." That night, Gerald commented that she seemed different. "Quieter," he said, "but not in a bad way, more peaceful." "I'm trying," Margaret said. "I'm trying to be better." He reached across the dinner table and took her hand. "I see it, and I want you to know I'm proud of you. What you did was terrible, but what you're doing now, facing it, trying to change, that takes real strength." It was the most he had said to her in months, and it meant more than any forced acknowledgement from a stranger ever could. Later that week, Emma called with news. "I told David about you, about what happened and about your therapy. He wants to meet you." David, the boyfriend Margaret hadn't known existed until 3 weeks ago. "I'd love to meet him," Margaret said, and meant it. "Mum, I need you to promise me something. No criticism. No suggestions about his job or his car or his clothes or anything. Just be kind. Just be interested in him as a person." The old Margaret would have been offended by the stipulation. The new Margaret understood it was necessary. "I promise," she said. "I'll listen more than I talk. I'll ask questions. I'll be kind." "Thank you," Emma said, and the relief in her voice broke Margaret's heart a little. She was rebuilding, brick by brick, relationship by relationship. It was slow work, painful work, but it was the most important work she had ever done. The viral videos were still out there. Her face was still a meme, still a symbol of entitled behavior. But she was learning to live with that shame, to carry it as a reminder of who she never wanted to be again. In her journal that night, she wrote, "I grabbed a sword to force someone to see me, but the person I really needed to see was myself, the person I had become, the damage I was causing. Today, I finally opened my eyes." 6 months had passed since the incident when Margaret found herself standing outside Buckingham Palace once again. This time, she wasn't a tourist seeking the perfect photograph. She was there with a purpose that would have seemed impossible half a year ago. Dr. Singh had suggested it during their final counseling session. Sometimes, the place where we broke is the place where we need to return to truly heal, not to recreate the trauma, but to prove to yourself that you're different now. The crowds were thinner today, a gray Tuesday afternoon in autumn. Margaret stood at the barrier, watching the guards go through their ceremony. She recognized the discipline in their movements, the dedication it required to stand perfectly still while tourists gawked and cameras flashed. She saw them now not as props, but as people doing difficult, important work. She wasn't alone. Gerald stood beside her, his hand in hers. Emma was there too, with David, a kind-faced accountant who made her daughter laugh. They had come to support her, but also because Margaret had asked them to witness something. In her bag was a letter, carefully composed over many weeks. Not an apology this time, but something different. A testament to change. She had arranged, through the proper channels, to deliver it to the military command, and they had agreed to accept it as part of the restorative justice process she had undertaken. As they waited, Margaret thought about the journey that had brought her here. The 8 counseling sessions with Dr. Singh had become 12, then 16. Each one had peeled back another layer of understanding about why she had behaved the way she did. They had traced it back to her childhood, to a mother who had only noticed her when she was exceptional or problematic, never when she was simply being. Margaret had learned to equate love with attention, and attention with conflict. Breaking that pattern had been exhausting. There were days when she failed, when the old impulses surged up and she snapped at someone before she could stop herself. But the difference was that now she recognized it, apologized immediately, and examined why it had happened. She was learning to pause, to breathe, to ask herself what she really needed before demanding it from others. Her relationships had slowly begun to heal. Gerald had joined her for couples counseling, and they had started talking again, really talking, about their fears and disappointments and hopes. They had discovered that they were both lonely, both struggling with retirement and aging, both afraid of becoming irrelevant. But now they faced it together instead of retreating into separate silences. Emma visited more often now. She and David had come for Sunday lunch 3 times, and Margaret had kept her promise. She asked questions and listened to the answers. She bit back criticism and offered encouragement instead. When David mentioned he was worried about his mother's health, Margaret had shared resources from her own research without making it about herself. Small victories, but they accumulated. Her son James had even video called from Australia last month. They had talked for an hour, the longest conversation they'd had in years. He had seen the viral video, of course, everyone had. But he had also seen her genuine efforts to change, documented in the occasional updates Emma shared with him. "I'm proud of you, Mum," he had said. "It takes guts to face yourself like this." The garden club had been a loss she had to accept. The bridges there were too burned, the history too fraught. But she had found a new community through a volunteer program Dr. Singh had recommended. She spent 3 mornings a week reading to elderly patients at a care home. Listening to their stories, being present for them without needing anything in return, had taught her more about genuine connection than anything else. One of the residents, a 93-year-old woman named Dorothy, had become a particular friend. Dorothy had been a teacher, then a headmistress, a woman of strong opinions and high standards. "I was like you once," she had told Margaret during one of their sessions. "Always needing to be right, to be in charge, to matter. Then I got old enough that none of it mattered anymore, and I realized I'd wasted so much time on my own pride. A voice pulled Margaret back to the present. A military liaison officer had arrived, a woman in uniform who greeted them formally. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Captain Andrews. I understand you have something you'd like to submit to the Ministry of Defense." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out the letter, enclosed in a formal envelope. But before she handed it over, she spoke. "6 months ago, I stood here and did something unforgivable. I assaulted a soldier on duty because I needed attention more than I needed to be a decent human being. I became a viral sensation, the worst kind, a symbol of entitlement and disrespect." People nearby had started to listen. She saw a few phones come out and her first instinct was to freeze, to flee, but she pushed through it. "I'm not here to make excuses or seek sympathy. I'm here because I want the military, and particularly Private Thornton if he ever hears about this, to know that his compassion changed my life. He could have pressed charges. He could have let me face the full consequences of my actions. Instead, he showed mercy, and that mercy gave me the chance to become a better person." She handed the letter to Captain Andrews. "This contains the details of my journey over the past 6 months. The counseling, the amends I've made, the volunteer work I've undertaken. It's not to show off or seek praise. It's to demonstrate that his kindness wasn't wasted, that I took the second chance he gave me and tried to earn it." Captain Andrews accepted the letter with a nod. "I'll ensure this reaches the appropriate people, Mrs. Whitmore. For what it's worth, the Restorative Justice Program speaks highly of your participation." "Thank you," Margaret said quietly. As Captain Andrews left, Gerald squeezed Margaret's hand. "That was brave." "It was necessary," she replied. They stayed for a while longer, watching the guards, watching the tourists, watching life unfold around them. Margaret noticed a young woman arguing with her companion about the best photo angle, her voice rising in frustration. 6 months ago, she would have jumped in with advice, inserting herself into their moment. Now she simply observed, recognizing the desire to control, to be helpful, to be seen, and she let it pass. On the drive home, Emma spoke from the backseat. "Mum, David and I have been talking. We're thinking about getting engaged." Margaret's first instinct was to flood Emma with questions, advice, wedding planning ideas. She felt the words bubbling up, the need to be involved, to be central to this moment. Instead, she took a breath and said, "That's wonderful, darling. Tell me about how you're feeling about it." And Emma did. She talked about her hopes and fears, about wanting a small ceremony, about worrying whether it was too soon. Margaret listened, offering support when asked, staying quiet when not. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done, and one of the most important. That evening, Margaret sat in her garden with her journal, watching the autumn sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She wrote about the day, about standing at the palace without incident, about Emma's news, about the ongoing work of being better. Her phone buzzed, an email from an address she didn't recognize. She almost deleted it, assuming it was another angry message about the viral video, but something made her open it. The message was brief. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Private James Thornton. Captain Andrews forwarded your letter to me, along with the report from the Restorative Justice Program. I wanted you to know that I read every word. Your journey over these past 6 months has been remarkable. You didn't just accept the consequences of your actions. You used them as a catalyst for genuine change. That takes extraordinary courage. I also wanted to tell you something I didn't share during our mediated meeting. That day at the palace, you weren't the first person who had grabbed at my sword. You were the 5th that week. The others were drunk or showing off for friends. But you were different. You were in pain, and I've thought about that a lot. Your pain didn't excuse your actions, but it explained them. And your response to that pain, once you understood it, has been inspiring. You could have just served your time, gone through the motions, and moved on. Instead, you did the hard work of actually changing. I'm writing to tell you that I forgive you completely. More than that, I'm grateful. Your case was discussed in our unit as an example of how restorative justice can work when both parties engage with it honestly. You've shown that people can change, that one terrible moment doesn't have to define a lifetime. I hope you continue to heal and grow. I hope you find the peace and purpose you were seeking. And I hope you know that your efforts matter, not because you're performing for others, but because you're becoming who you were always meant to be. With respect, James Thornton. Margaret read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Gerald came out to the garden and found her there, clutching her phone, weeping. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Nothing's wrong," she managed. "For the first time in a very long time, something is very right." She showed him the email. He read it slowly, then pulled her into a tight embrace. "You did it, love. You actually did it." That night, Margaret struggled to sleep, but for once it wasn't anxiety or shame keeping her awake. It was a sense of possibility. She thought about Dorothy at the care home, who had told her it was never too late to become who you might have been. She thought about James Thornton, carrying his own trauma with grace and extending mercy to a stranger who had wronged him. She thought about Emma and David, building a life together, and how she might be part of that life now in a healthy way. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, grabbing a sword in a desperate bid for acknowledgement. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone she had known but no longer was. The transformation hadn't been sudden or magical. It had been slow, painful, full of setbacks and small victories, but it was real. The next morning she woke early and went for a walk in Richmond Park. The deer were out, grazing in the misty dawn, and she stopped to watch them. A few other early risers passed by, offering quiet nods of greeting. She nodded back, content to be one person among many, no more or less important than anyone else. At the care home later that day, Dorothy was having a difficult morning. She was frustrated with her weakening memory, snapping at the nurses, refusing her medication. Margaret sat with her, not trying to fix anything, just being present. "I hate this," Dorothy said bitterly. "Being helpless, being a burden, mattering to no one." "You matter to me," Margaret said simply. "Not because of what you can do or remember, but because you're here and you're you. That's enough." Dorothy looked at her sharply. "You've changed since you started coming here. You used to be so tense, so eager to be helpful. Now you just sit." "I'm learning that being present is more important than being useful," Margaret replied. "That sometimes people just need witness, not solutions." "Where did you learn that?" Dorothy asked. "From a young soldier who showed me more grace than I deserved, and from realizing that I'd spent my whole life trying to matter to everyone when I needed to matter to myself first." Dorothy nodded slowly. "That's wisdom, that is. Took me 90 years to learn it. You're ahead of the game." In the weeks that followed, Margaret continued her work. She volunteered. She attended a support group for people struggling with attention-seeking behaviors. She slowly, carefully, rebuilt trust with old friends by showing up consistently, listening more than talking, offering help without strings attached. The viral video never went away. She would occasionally see it pop up, shared in new contexts, her face frozen in that moment of entitled fury. But she had learned to separate her present self from that captured moment. That was who she had been. This now was who she was becoming. On Christmas Eve, her entire family gathered at her home for the first time in 5 years. James had flown in from Australia with his wife and 2 children Margaret barely knew. Emma and David were there, now officially engaged. Gerald's sister and her family filled out the table. The house was full of noise and laughter and the comfortable chaos of family. Margaret moved through it all with a light step, helping where needed, stepping back when not. She listened to her grandchildren's stories about school. She asked James's wife about her work as a veterinarian. She complimented David's mother's pie. She was part of the gathering without needing to be the center of it. After dinner, Emma found her in the kitchen washing up. "You seem happy, Mum," really happy. I am, Margaret said, surprised to realize it was true. I'm not the center of attention. I'm not controlling anything. I'm not trying to prove anything. And I'm happy. The incident at the palace, Emma said carefully. I know it was awful, but in a strange way, it was the best thing that could have happened. It woke you up. Margaret dried her hands and turned to face her daughter. It broke me open. But sometimes we need to break before we can heal properly. That guard, James Thornton, he didn't just show me mercy. He showed me that change was possible. That one terrible moment didn't have to define me forever. They hugged, a real hug, without tension or unspoken grievances. When they pulled apart, Emma was crying. I have my mum back. The mum I remember from when I was little before everything got so hard. Later, as guests departed and the house quieted, Margaret stood at her window looking out at the winter night. Somewhere out there, James Thornton was probably with his own family, carrying on with his life. He would never know how completely he had changed hers. She thought about writing to him again, but decided against it. He had already given her enough. The greatest gift she could give him now was to actually be the person she had promised to become, not for applause or acknowledgement, but because it was right. In her journal that night, she wrote her final entry on the subject. 6 months ago, I grabbed a Royal Guard sword because I couldn't stand being invisible. Today, I understand that I was never invisible. I was just looking in the wrong places for validation. Real worth isn't given by strangers or forced from unwilling participants. It's built quietly, through consistent kindness, genuine listening, and the courage to change when change is needed. I am Margaret Whitmore. I am not perfect. I still struggle with old impulses. But I am learning, growing, becoming. That is enough. I am enough. And I am finally truly seen. Not by the millions who watched my worst moment, but by the people who matter. By my family, who are learning to trust me again. By the residents at the care home, who look forward to my visits. By James Thornton, who saw past my actions to the pain beneath and offered a path forward. Most importantly, I am seen by myself. And what I see, for the first time in years, is someone worth knowing. She closed the journal and placed it on her nightstand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to practice being better. But tonight, she would sleep peacefully, no longer fighting for acknowledgement, no longer grasping at validation. She had found what she was looking for, but not where she expected to find it. Not in the eyes of strangers or the silence of a disciplined guard. She found it in the hard work of change, in the grace of second chances, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was becoming who she was meant to be. The viral video would live forever on the internet. But Margaret Whitmore was learning to live beyond it, building a legacy of change that no amount of online mockery could erase. She had grabbed a sword and found shame. But in that shame, she had discovered the possibility of redemption. And that, in the end, made all the difference.